Te Urawa Flavel.
Mr Speaker, I move that the local electoral Māori representation amendment bill be now read a first time. At the appropriate time, I intend to move that the bill be considered by the Māori Affairs Select Committee. Mr Speaker, if we go back in time just to set the scene, just a few years ago, the Local Government Act 2001 was a hugely significant moment in our history. That legislation provided councils with the opportunity to establish Māori wards along similar lines to that of parliamentary electorates. In that same year, the Bay of Plenty Regional Council Māori Constituency Empowering Act introduced Māori wards and constituency seats, thereby guaranteeing Māori representation at the local level, at least in one region, and I acknowledge the work by the Honourable Mita Ririnui here. A year later, the Local Government Act 2002 created the incentive for local government to place greater emphasis on Māori participation and representation. Within that Act, Section 81 provided explicit commitment for local authorities to establish and maintain processes to provide opportunities for Māori to contribute to the decision-making processes at the local authority level. Mr Speaker, as agents of the Crown, all local authorities are required to take into account the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Indeed, the treaty provides the ultimate guarantee to tangata whenua that self-determination and authority can be best expressed in local government decision-making. So just over 2 months ago, the Minister of Māori Affairs, in front of over 2,000 people and beamed around the world through satellite TV, announced that New Zealand would finally support the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I was there, I saw it happen. For the benefit of all members of this House, Article 18 of that declaration confirms that Indigenous peoples have the right to participate in decision-making in matters which would affect their rights through representatives chosen by themselves in accordance with their own procedures, as well as to maintain and develop their own Indigenous decision-making institutions. Well, Mr Speaker, I'd like to say at this point, I rest my case. I rest my case. The Treaty of Waitangi, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the 3 separate pieces of local government legislation is surely all the evidence that is needed to consolidate Māori representation in local government. But no, not quite, far from it. Mr Speaker, despite the requirement of yet another piece of legislation, Section 4 of the Local Electoral Act 2001, which requires local government to provide for fair and effective representation, Māori representation on local government councils is, at its best, less than 5%. Less than 5%. So, clearly Māori representation at the local body level is minimal. We just do not get a Māori view at the decision-making table. What we're talking about here is the treaty partner, the Indigenous peoples of this land, marginalised by limited representation and participation. And when we talk about tangata whenua, we're not just talking about the community of interest, a community of interest or key stakeholders. What we're talking about here are signatories to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So the Māori Party wishes to promote this bill because direct representation on local government would reflect the treaty obligation to actively protect Māori rights. Māori representation is the first step towards building a treaty-based partnership with local Māori. So this bill is an attempt to do all of this. It's an attempt to do all of this. The bill goes back to the original Local Electoral Act of 2001 to replace voluntary Māori representation in local government with a requirement for territorial and regional authorities to establish one or more Māori wards. The number of Māori seats would be in proportion to the total Māori population of the relevant territory or region. And why not? Surely our decision-making bodies should reflect our communities. Why then, sir, is this such an issue? Well, let's just think how well the treaty principles of partnership, protection and participation have worked out in practice. We could look to the unfair rating and valuing of Māori land, the decimation of Māori land and water resources through pollution. Indeed, earlier today my colleague Rahui Kātane talked about the waste that was discharged directly into the Waikato River from the Parana Park under the authority of the local council. We could talk about the disregard of other Māori resource value, such as the protection of wāhi tapu, an issue very topical today, with the actions of Ngāti Ruanui, who have complained to the South Taranaki District Council and the Taranaki Regional Council about the damage done by cows who are allowed to trample and desecrate wāhi tapu and pā sites. We could look at the history of the public works, and I think that members got a good feel of what we were talking about when my private members bill was debated earlier during this term of this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, perhaps if I move to the more positive approach to the issue of Māori representation, I'd like to just remind the House of the vital importance that mana whenua place on our environment and our role as kaitiaki, tangata kaitiaki, to ensure active protection of resources for all New Zealanders, and especially for those generations to come. At home in my area, that responsibility we uphold as guardians of the environment has been recognised at the national level with the return of the Tarawa Lakes. The Rotorua Lakes Strategy Group is made up of 2 representatives from the Tarawa Lakes Trust, the Rotorua District Council and Environment Bay of Plenty. So the sole purpose of that group is to promote the sustainable management of the Tarawa Rotorua Lakes and their catchments for the use and enjoyment of present and future generations, while also recognising and providing for the traditional relationship of Tarawa with the lakes. Even without this mechanism, however, there are many varied issues that would benefit from active community participation and representation of Māori outside of the lake structure. So this is at the crux of the issues motivating this bill. Mr. Speaker, local authorities throughout the country have tried to varying degrees to enable the views of Māori to be heard through advisory committees, standing committees and other consultative processes. But it is entirely random as to how effective local authorities are in consulting with tangata whenua and Māori communities before major policy decisions that significantly affect Māori people. Mr. Speaker, 3 years ago, Christine Shane and Veronica Tawhai released a report on Māori engagement with local government, which I think is of immediate relevance to this bill. They said, and I quote, lack of political will in the past to advance Māori local political self-determination within local government structures has stifled Māori participation. This still holds true today. Seeking full Māori participation and the changes required to secure such participation must be reconceptualised as an effort for enhancing social justice and the democratic legitimacy of our local body institutions. In this way, local governments can be leaders in creating a better future with Māori for all New Zealanders in Aotearoa. End of quote. So these are worthy goals and honourable sentiments for all members to reflect on. Mr. Speaker, what we know from the experience of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council Māori Constituency Empowerment Bill is, the Empowerment Act, is that the relationship was positive and valuable, and that other councillors learned a great deal from their Māori counterparts. In the report tabled by the, just as an aside in terms of closing and finishing up my contribution in introducing this bill, sir, there's a report on the bill table that from the Attorney General, and in that report he notes that it's both significant and important to provide better provision for Māori representation in local government. He suggests further that the establishment of dedicated Māori representation could be said to be rationally connected to the objective of making better provision for Māori representation in local government. Notwithstanding the conclusions of the Attorney General's report, sir, and it's available for members, I still believe that the circumstances for Māori representation are so compelling that this Parliament must adopt this bill as a direct means of creating a better future with Māori for all New Zealanders in Aotearoa.
Question is the motion.